Welcome to each and every one of you. My name is Paul-André Durocher. I'm the Archbishop of Gatineau, and this is Advent Readings, a series of reflections on the daily readings proposed by the liturgy of the Roman Catholic Church to its faithful. As usual, the first reading is from the book of Isaiah, the second always from the Gospels. And since yesterday, we've started a new series of Gospel readings, Jesus' reflections on the role of John the Baptist. But let's start with Isaiah. We've been used since the beginning of Advent to reading excerpts that focus on hope and on renewal, prophecies of God intervening to restore his people, to restore the world, to restore creation itself. Today, the text that we are given to read is quite different. It is, a regret expressed by God, a regret, at the same time an invitation and a warning. It's not a long text, but it's a very powerful text from Isaiah chapter 48, verses 17 to 19. Let's read this. Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. I am the Lord your God, who teaches you for your own good, who leads you in the way you should go. Just a word about this introduction. So again, Isaiah is speaking in the name of God, who names himself. God gives the name Redeemer. Redeemer, as I remind you, is a kin relationship. It's somebody from the family who is in a position to help me out of my difficulties. That is the Redeemer in the Old Testament. The Holy One of Israel. This title for God often comes back now in Isaiah. The Holy One. God is holy, meaning that God is completely different from us. God is on another sphere, on another level. God is the all-powerful God, the creator God. And yet this God is a member of my family, is interested in me, does not let me go. And God says, I am the Lord your God. So the Lord is Yahweh, your God, who teaches you for your own good, who leads you in the way you should go. And this is an echo of the Exodus story, because God taught the people at Sinai when God gave the law, the Torah. And at the same time, God is the one who leads us through the desert towards the promised land. So this is the God who loves us, cares for us, and manifests this care, this love, by teaching and by accompaniment and leading us forward. Now here comes the regret. Oh, that you had paid attention to my commandments, to my teachings. If only, it's the regret, if only you had done this. Obviously, it implies that Israel did not abide by the commandments, did not pay attention to them. But if you had, then your prosperity would have been like a river and your success like the waves of the sea. What a beautiful image, You would have been living abundantly in life if you had paid attention to my commandments, but you didn't. So the consequence is that you're in a situation of suffering, you're in a situation of loss, you're in a situation of exile. If you had listened, your offspring would have been like the sand, and your descendants like its grains. In other words, children is a sign of God's blessing for Isaiah. And the lack of children is a sign of God withholding that blessing. And obviously Israel, because of the death of so many of its warriors and of so many of its people, there are less children. The descendants, the people is dwindling. And God ends, and their name, your descendants' names, would never be cut off or destroyed from before me if you had paid attention. So there's a regret expressed here on behalf of God that if only you had done this. There's a warning. Because you didn't do it, look at what you're living. And if you keep on neglecting my teachings, if you keep on neglecting the covenant, you're not going to get out of this. The situation will only grow worse. But there's an invitation then. Underneath all of this is an invitation to pay attention, to be faithful to the covenant, to allow God to teach us and to lead us. This is the way towards life. This is the message of Isaiah today. Let's move to Matthew's Gospel. Again, we're looking at this section from Matthew's 11th chapter where Jesus is speaking to the crowds about John the Baptist. We're reading verses 16 to 19. So Jesus, continuing to speak to the crowds about John the Baptist, says, "To what will I compare this generation?" Meaning these people, you who are listening to me, this crowd, and your kinfolk, this generation, this time, to what will I compare them? This generation is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another. "We played the flute for you and you did not dance. We wailed and you did not mourn." So Jesus is imagining this plaza, this space in the middle of villages where people would gather, and he imagines children, and some children playing the flute to kind of get others to dance, and others are saying, "Oh, no, I don't want to dance," and so okay, then we'll play wailing songs, but I don't want to pretend I'm mourning. It's like kids who are trying to figure out which game are we going to play here, and somebody says, "Let's play this." "No, we don't want to play that." "Let's play that." "No, we don't want to play that," and they end up not playing anything at all. And so the comparison here is comparing this generation to children, to childishness, and not being childlike, but being childish, just being focused on yourself and out of spite, not joining in any activities. And how does John see this applied to this community? He says, "For John," and he's speaking of John the Baptist, "for John came neither eating nor drinking, and they said, 'He has a demon.'" John lived a very ascetic life in the desert. He really was a hermit, and he comes and he has this message, and people say, "He has a demon." And the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, "Oh, look, a glutton and a drunken, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." So, they say, well, John is calling for asceticism, and they say, well, he's possessed. No point following him. Jesus is the contrary. Jesus is one who lives with the people, joins in their festivities, joins in their life, and they say, well, look, he's a drunkard and a glutton. In philosophy, we call these ad hominem arguments. Rather than listening to what somebody has to say and judging it for its own merit, you dismiss what the person has to say on the basis of judging the person, judging the messenger, shooting the messenger because really you don't like the message. We do this all the time. This is a typical way of acting. "Oh, so-and-so, he's like that. I don't have to listen to what he says." Some people sometimes in our lives, they kind of say, well, maybe you should consider this. And our response is, well, who are you to talk to me about that? Look at what you're doing and everything. So we dismiss the person because we don't want to listen to what the person is saying to us. We don't want to hear the message because the message might be relevant. And what Jesus is saying is that, well, this is very childish to do this. And this is what you're doing. You're dismissing John the Baptist. You're dismissing me, and yet we offer two kind of approaches, and both approaches you say no. But ultimately, what you're dismissing is God's wisdom. God who's speaking to you through John the Baptist, through me, Jesus is saying. Again, like yesterday, it brings out how John the Baptist and Jesus are kind of together involved in this moment in the history of our salvation, and how they are both facing rejection, how they are both being put aside, marginalized by the leadership. But, he says, wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. One other translation is, wisdom is shown to be just by her deeds. In other words, you might dismiss the messengers, but the message is bearing fruit. Look at the conversion of people. Look how people are coming back to God, both through the preaching of John the Baptist and through the teaching of Jesus. Look at how God's work is being done here, how people are being restored, how people are being renewed. So through the effects of the teaching of this wisdom that comes from God, through the mouth of John the Baptist, through the mouth of Jesus, look at what's happening. See the effects. If you don't believe the messenger, look at what the message is doing. And indeed, even today in the church, we can be so discouraged by the church leadership, by the preachers of the gospel, because of so many human faults and crimes committed by church leaders. And so we dismiss practically we have this tendency to simply dismiss the church, dismiss the message. And yet the message itself, the good news, has a powerful impact in people's lives. It can transform lives. It can change lives. Let's ask God for the gift today of not dismissing, the teachers. Not the message. We can have our problems with the teachers. Let's not dismiss the message. Let's think of Isaiah, who's saying, if you listened to my teachings, if you allowed me to lead you, you would come to abundant life. This is what Jesus is promising us, this abundance of life. So let's take his message to heart in spite of all the weaknesses of the messengers. There's a beautiful line in one of the writings of St. Paul where he says, we, the preachers, the teachers, we carry a treasure in earthen vessels. We are vessels and we are earthen vessels, cracked pottery. But the message itself is a treasure. Let's take the treasure to heart and let's live it in our daily lives. With this thought, I say, till tomorrow.